Samuel Hayes often said that history has a cruel sense of irony. And on April 8, 1943, over the skies of northern France, that irony took the form of a machine so heavy it seemed almost incapable of flight. From the combat reports and gun camera footage, one can almost imagine the scene. The new, massive American fighters slowly climbing into the clouds, their silver bodies gleaming in the sunlight. To the German pilots circling above, it was a ridiculous sight, flying cows struggling to reach them. Over the radio, Oberleutnant Ralph Hermachon laughed and said, "The Americans are sending us winged milk bottles." The experienced Luftwaffe pilots burst into laughter. They were used to sleek Focke-Wulfs and agile Messerschmitts. Those bulky American planes looked like perfect targets. But none of them knew that the so-called cow was, in truth, a minotaur, a bull-headed monster born to bring terror. Hidden inside those broad wings were 8.50 caliber Browning machine guns, powerful enough to erase those mocking smiles forever. Before we begin, if you enjoy history told from a different perspective, please like and subscribe to the channel so we can explore together the moments that shaped our world. Hayes later wrote, "The Thunderbolt was born out of fear, but built with reason." Its story didn't begin on the battlefield, but in an emergency meeting in 1940 at Republic Aviation. The US Army Air Corps wanted a fighter that could perform at high altitudes equal to the Luftwaffe. As soon as the order was given, a Georgian-born engineer named Alexander Kartveli decided to do something no one expected. He didn't design a small, light fighter. He built a giant, powerful steel beast, completely different from anything before. The first prototype weighed nearly 10,000 pounds, more than 65% heavier than its predecessor, the P-43. Its secret was in its heart, the Pratt & Whitney R2800 Double Wasp, an 18-cylinder engine paired with a complex turbo supercharger system running along the fuselage. Thanks to that, the Thunderbolt could still keep full power at 27,000 feet, where German engines were already gasping for air. Test pilots were doubtful when they first saw this monster. One even asked, "Is this thing really meant to fly?" When the first prototype of the Thunderbolt left the Farmingdale runway on a cold morning in early 1941, everyone held their breath. But when the throttle opened fully, the iron barrel shot forward like an artillery shell, surprising even the skeptical pilots. It didn't glide, it tore through the air. It wasn't a graceful test flight, it was a struggle between steel, wind, and mechanical power. The roar of the Pratt & Whitney R2800 thundered across the runway. The huge machine crawled forward slowly, then suddenly lifted its nose and broke free from the ground, like a stubborn mass of metal defying gravity. Everyone watching, engineers, mechanics, Air Corps officers, fell silent. No one could believe that something so massive could fly so smoothly. When the test pilot landed and got out, he said half-jokingly, "If this thing can fly, then the laws of aerodynamics need to be rewritten." From that moment, Kartveli knew he was right. He hadn't built a graceful fighter. He had created a flying fortress, a machine that could take punishment, fight, and come home to tell its story. He didn't need it to look beautiful. He needed it to survive. And that mindset made the Thunderbolt completely different from every other fighter of its time. While Europe chased elegant designs like the Spitfire and Messerschmitt, fast, light, and agile, America chose the path of industry. Stronger, bigger, and armed with more firepower than anything else that could take off. The young engineers in Kartveli's team said he often walked around the workshop, sketching while mumbling to himself, "If it's heavy, we'll give it power. If it's big, we'll give it speed. If it meets the wind, we'll give it thunder." That saying later became the spirit of the entire P-47 line. Gradually, the prototypes improved. The turbo supercharger, once thought impossible to fit in a fighter's body, finally worked perfectly. The engineers had to redesign the whole lower fuselage to make space for the huge air ducts and coolers, giving the aircraft a belly like a flying fuel tank. But in return, the Thunderbolt could climb fast and stay powerful at altitudes where German planes were almost helpless. In the next test, at 25,000 feet, the P-47 shot upward like a silver arrow. And there, where German engines usually gasped, its roar remained strong. A technical officer exclaimed, "Up here, it feels just like down there, no loss of power at all." From that moment, the US Army Air Corps realized they had something completely new, a machine not just built to fight, but to change the way wars were fought. Kartveli quietly wrote a short line in his technical journal. "This is not a fighter. This is a symbol of endurance." And he was right. Years later, as P-47s thundered across European skies, their roar, which the Germans called Donnerschlag, meaning thunderstrike, stood as proof of that philosophy. Strength doesn't need to be beautiful to be great. Hayes later recalled that the early days of Thunderbolt training were both terrifying and awe-inspiring. He compared them to trying to tame a wild beast with bare hands. No one dared to come close without a trace of fear. Taming a monster was never easy, and the knights who tried might have to pay a heavy price to master it. So it was with the Thunderbolt training it was almost as dangerous as real combat. Most of the young pilots then were barely in their 20s, newly graduated from flight schools in Florida and Texas. They were used to flying P-40 or P-39s, small, light, and easy to handle. But the Thunderbolt was completely different, bigger, heavier, and slower to respond than anything they had ever flown. When the 56th Fighter Group received their first P-47s in late 1942, excitement quickly turned to fear. The plane was extremely temperamental. It could flip on takeoff, skid out of control when landing, and dive so fast the controls would lock. At high altitude, it could slice through the air, but on the ground, it behaved like an untamed animal. If the throttle wasn't handled carefully, the massive torque from the R2800 engine could twist the aircraft sideways, sending it into a violent spin and flipping it over like a raging bull. One small mistake on the runway often ended with the sound of tearing metal and columns of black smoke. Hub Zemke, the group's commander, spent hours watching wrecks smolder in the grass, mechanics standing silently beside them. The air was heavy with tension. One young pilot, trembling, came up to him and whispered, "Sir, maybe this monster isn't meant for humans." Zemke looked at him, voice calm and firm. "No, it's just not meant for those who want things easy." From that day on, no one in the squadron took training lightly. Every flight became a battle between man and machine. Technical officers said some pilots returned pale-faced, their hands stiff after wrestling the control stick during steep dives. One pilot threw his helmet on the ground, gasping, "I didn't fly it, I fought it!" But it was through those struggles that the Thunderbolt began to choose its true pilots. It didn't need the fastest, it needed the most patient. Those who could master it found a loyal beast, powerful, nearly indestructible. After hundreds of training hours, they learned to speak to the machine, how to work with its weight, feel the throttle's rhythm, and hold the wings steady in the wind. Once they learned, the Thunderbolt stopped being an enemy. It became a comrade, rough but faithful. Zemke told Hayes in a post-war interview, "The first day I flew it, I thought, good God, this is an aluminum nightmare. But by the 10th day I knew, this nightmare would make the Nazis wake up." Out of those grueling days, a new kind of pilot was born, one who feared neither big planes, nor heavy engines, nor crashes. They believed that if the Thunderbolt could survive any dive, then so could they. Taming it came at a high cost, not just sweat, but blood and tears. From September 1942 to January 1943, 18 pilots and 41 aircraft were lost to training accidents alone. Facing that, Commander Zemke gathered his men and said, "Your enemy isn't this airplane, it's your old habits." They had to adapt. They had to forget old fighting styles and learn to use weight, power, and speed to their advantage. The Thunderbolt didn't win with grace, it won with endurance and toughness. And that belief, paid for with blood, crashes, and sheer determination, laid the foundation for victory to come. From then on, the Thunderbolt was no longer the untamable beast, but the right hand of the US Air Force, a symbol of unbroken will in the skies over Europe. As Hayes later remarked, it was the thing that changed the entire air war over Europe. Hayes later recalled meeting Robert S. Johnson many years after the war at a veterans' reunion in Tulsa. By then, Johnson was in his 40s, modest in appearance, soft-spoken, but in his eyes there still burned something indescribable, the look of a man who had seen death and flown back from hell. "Were you afraid?" I asked him. Johnson smiled faintly, looking into the distance. "No, I wasn't afraid. I just couldn't believe that monster would protect me to the very end." What he told that day left the whole hall silent. It was the kind of story only those who had truly faced death could tell. For the 56th Fighter Group, it happened on June 26, 1943, over Lisieux, France, the day Lieutenant Robert S. Johnson refused to fall. His squadron was returning from an escort mission when 16 FW-19s 0S of JG-26 dove on them out of the sun, a perfect ambush. "We saw nothing but streaks of light ripping across the sky," Johnson said. "A second later, everything exploded in fire and cannon shells." His P-47 was hit in the first burst. 4 20mm rounds tore through the fuselage, one exploding near the cockpit. Oil and smoke filled the canopy. The aircraft was shattered. Canopy cracked, hydraulics gone, engine cowling torn away. Shrapnel wounded him in the face and leg. With pressure dropping, Johnson grew dizzy, blood soaking his collar. He tried to pull the stick. The controls were dead. He reached for the canopy release, jammed. A shell fragment had locked it tight. He was trapped in a burning plane. "I thought it was over," he said. "I screamed to God, but all I could hear was the wind." Yet instead of giving up, Johnson did the unthinkable. He pushed the throttle to full. The Thunderbolt shuddered violently, the engine howling like a wounded beast, but it kept flying. He aimed for the English Channel, the blue sky over the water his only hope. Then a lone FW-190 appeared behind him, believed to be from 2/JG-26. The German pilot came so close that Johnson could see his eyes through the canopy. Then he fired. 4 cannons and 2 machine guns roared at once. Johnson ducked low, hiding behind the armor plate of his seat. The bullets hammered the fuselage like a storm of hammers. Then silence. The German had run out of ammo. The FW-190 pulled up beside him, circling. Johnson saw the young German's face. Blonde, no older than 20, eyes wide with disbelief. The enemy pilot raised his hand in salute, a gesture of respect, then rolled his wings and flew away. "I didn't feel proud," Johnson said quietly. "Just overwhelmed." His P-47 was torn apart, riddled with holes, black smoke pouring from the engine, but it refused to die. An hour later, Johnson made an emergency landing at Manston, England. The engine quit the moment the wheels touched the ground. Engineers ran to the wreck and stopped cold. One of them began counting bullet holes. After reaching 200, he sighed and said, "No need to count anymore. This thing should be buried, not repaired." But Hub Zemke, their commander, walked up, patted Johnson's shoulder, looked at the scorched fuselage, and said slowly, "If it can survive that, it can help us win this war." From that day on, the pilots of the 56th had a new name for the Thunderbolt: the jug, the unbreakable jug. And as Hayes once wrote, from that moment on, they no longer flew with the Thunderbolt. They flew alongside it. Hayes wrote that it was the moment when men stopped fearing airplanes and began to fear what they could do with them. After watching Robert Johnson return from hell, Hub Zemke realized that the P-47 could not be used like a Spitfire or a Mustang. It wasn't a sword that sliced gracefully through the enemy. It was a hammer, forged to smash everything in its path. In his tactical notebook, Zemke crossed out most of the old rules and wrote just one line. Keep your altitude, dive, fire, break away. If you try to turn, you die. The P-47 had become the hammer instead of the sword. He taught his pilots to treat altitude as gold and speed as breath. The Thunderbolt was heavy, but that weight turned it into a giant bullet in a dive. At 30,000 feet, it could reach over 550 miles per hour, faster than any German fighter of its time. Veterans described the feeling of diving in a Thunderbolt at that speed as riding a steel bull, the strongest, toughest bull in the world, charging headfirst into the red scarves of German squadrons, bringing with it the terror of destruction. In that moment, one pilot told Hayes, "You're no longer the one flying. You're just hanging onto the stick and letting the beast crash straight into war." When its 8.50 caliber Browning machine guns fired together, the roar was like a mechanical storm, deep, steady, and thunderous. Every second, hundreds of rounds tore through the air, forming a moving wall of metal. This tactic, boom and zoom, spread quickly among US fighter units. They learned to fly higher, choose the perfect diving angle, strike once with deadly force, and climb away before the enemy could react. Battle after battle, day after day, the sound of Thunderbolt thunder became a nightmare over Europe. German reports began noting cases of aircraft disintegrating under concentrated fire. And from the summer of 1943 onward, the old fears, fear of altitude, fear of speed, fear of the massive machine that once seemed uncontrollable, were gone. In their place was a cold confidence, the calm of men who knew that every dive they made could be a death sentence for someone below. The fear had shifted entirely. What once haunted Allied pilots now belonged to the Luftwaffe, a deeper, heavier dread, the fear of destruction, of defeat, and of hopelessness. The laughter of April had vanished, buried with those who once mocked the Thunderbolt. Hayes called August 17, 1943, the day the flying hammers struck the heart of Germany. On that day, the US 8th Air Force launched a deep raid into Germany along two routes, south toward Regensburg and north toward Schweinfurt, the heart of Germany's strategic ball-bearing production. The German sky was blindingly bright, without a single cloud. A German officer later wrote, "We could see them from miles away, layer upon layer of heavy, slow bombers, moving like an army of iron marching across the daylight." For the American pilots, the mission felt like a one-way trip. The Thunderbolt, powerful as it was, still had one fatal weakness: limited range. It could only escort the bombers halfway before turning back for fuel. The remaining stretch, where the bombers had no fighter cover, was pure nightmare. As the B-17 formations turned west after their bombing runs, the sky behind them seemed to open a gate to hell. Black dots, German fighters came diving in. But this time, the Thunderbolts came back to meet them. The 56th and 78th Fighter Groups dove from 30,000 feet, their speeds passing 500 miles per hour, and in an instant, the sky became a storm of fire. Captured German gunner Hinrich Roeder later said, "They came down like hammers from heaven. I hit their wings, nothing happened. Then they fired, and the plane ahead of me just disappeared. No explosion, just pieces of metal. It was the first time the Luftwaffe truly feared the Thunderbolt's firepower. 8.50 caliber Browning guns firing together for 2 seconds created an impenetrable wall of lead. When the bullet struck, the metal screamed, the sound of thunder tearing the air. One surviving German pilot, during interrogation, said in despair, "We thought they were using cannons." But they were only machine guns. In his notes, Hayes quoted that line, "War is not won by fear alone, but fear makes victory easier." Because on that day, the US Air Force finally understood what Kartveli had predicted back in 1940. Fear could be engineered from steel and technology. The Thunderbolt was no longer a symbol of clumsiness. It had become the embodiment of American industrial power, where mechanics and courage fused into one. In his post-mission report, Hub Zemke wrote simply, "We have learned not to fear, and when we stop fearing, they will fear for us." Hayes called the summer of 1943 the moment when the war reached its most violent crescendo, the point where sweat, blood, and fire fused into one brutal rhythm. And in that great symphony of war, the Thunderbolt, with its turbo supercharger, became the instrument that kept the tempo alive. While German engines gasped for breath, their deep mechanical hum, once proud and fierce, began to fade into a dying note. October 8, 1943, the sky over northern France. The air that morning was strangely clear and blue. Hans Philipp, one of the Luftwaffe's greatest aces, over 200 victories to his name, led a formation of EVU 190s climbing to 28,000 feet to intercept American bombers. Historians later believed that during this battle, Philipp's group crossed paths with the Thunderbolts of the 56th Fighter Group, the same American giants he once mocked. One of the FW-19s shot down that day bore the personal markings often used by Philipp. It exploded mid-air, vanishing into sunlight. An American pilot later recalled, "I saw a Focke-Wulf ahead, with markings they said belonged to Philipp. I fired from about 300 yards. Sparks ran along its fuselage. Then there was just a black cloud." No one could confirm for certain whether that was Philipp's plane. But for Hayes, the symbolism was undeniable. It marked the moment the Luftwaffe began to lose its breath, not only in the air, but in the war itself. It was the tragic end of a legend who had chosen the wrong civilization to fight for. Up there, nearly 9,000 meters high, the truth was simple. German engines had reached their limit. The FW-19s and BF-10-9s, so quick at low altitude, lost nearly a third of their power in the thin air. Meanwhile, the Thunderbolt, its air intake running the length of its fuselage, kept nearly all its strength. "Up there," one American pilot said, "they were the ones gasping for air, and we were the ones breathing freely." Hayes wrote, "Nothing breaks the enemy's spirit faster than realizing that the creature they once mocked is, in truth, a monster." And indeed, by early 1944, the Thunderbolt received an upgrade that turned it from formidable to fearsome. Republic Aviation unveiled a small change that completely rewrote the game, the paddle blade propeller. Larger, broader, and able to bite deeper into the air every time the R2800 engine roared. Now the Thunderbolt could climb at 3,000 feet per minute, nearly 1.5 times faster than before. The once slow giant had become a flying tiger. In his diary, Feldwebel Ernst Close wrote bitterly, "Those fat cows can climb now. They're no longer prey." And soon came the sound, that deep, heavy roar carrying for miles. Infantrymen called it the drum. The Germans named it Donnerschlag, the thunderstrike. It was the new voice of the Thunderbolt. When the paddle blade propeller spun at maximum speed, its tips reached near supersonic velocity, producing a low, growling rumble, like a giant drumbeat echoing across the sky. German soldiers later said they could recognize that sound instantly, the sound of death approaching. From afar, they'd hear the rumble grow louder like thunder rolling through valleys, like the heartbeat of a giant war machine. Then came the shadows of wings, and moments later, the storm of fire. Hayes closed that chapter with an image both tragic and majestic. The Thunderbolt was no longer just a fighter plane. It had become a storm of steel, the thunder before the rain of freedom that was about to fall upon Europe. There are days when the clock doesn't just measure time, it measures destiny. June 6, 1944, D-Day was one of those days. That morning, the sky over Normandy was calm and clear until history decided to change direction. From the west came a sound that every soldier had come to recognize, the deep thunder of hundreds of R2800 engines. More than 500 Thunderbolts swept toward the beaches, stacked in layers upon layers, like waves of steel rolling in from the sea. Below them, the Allied Navy was bombarding the coast. Above, the Thunderbolts formed an iron shield for thousands of landing craft and soldiers. Every pilot knew, if they failed, the invasion would drown in blood. But if they succeeded, Europe would be unlocked. An American pilot wrote in his diary, "I looked down and saw the sea full of ships, the sky full of planes. It felt like the whole world was flying with us." Across the lines, the Luftwaffe was only a shadow of what it once had been. Most airfields lay in ruins, fuel was scarce, and the few remaining pilots were barely trained. Still, a handful of German squadrons tried to take off. Brave men, but hopeless ones. Captured pilot Otto Voss later recalled, "We took off at dawn, 12 of us. I was the only one who came back. The sky belonged to you." That day, the sky was more than a battlefield. It was a declaration. Every burst of machine gun fire, every white contrail across the heavens was a statement that this century would belong to those who refused to yield. The laughter of 1943 had turned into the thunder of freedom, deep, unending, and rolling across the skies of Europe. By mid-1944, once the skies of Europe were almost completely under Allied control, the Thunderbolt found a new purpose, the fighter bomber. No longer limited to escorting bombers, it now carried bombs, rockets, and 50-caliber machine guns. Enough firepower to turn any German road, bridge, or convoy into a sea of flames. It had become the flying artillery of the Allied armies. Hayes wrote that one battlefield report from an American tank crew near St. Lo described a sight they would never forget. The ground started shaking before we even saw the planes. Then the whole horizon exploded. Even we shuddered, not out of fear, but out of sheer awe. In a post-war interrogation, Oberstleutnant Walter Lindt, commander of a German armored battalion, recalled in a strained voice, "In one attack, we lost 20 tanks. After that, no one dared move in daylight again. Wherever the Thunderbolt appeared, fear followed. You didn't fight when you heard its thunder. You hid or you died." Hayes wrote, "If Europe was where the Thunderbolt was forged, then the Pacific was where it was glorified." The same power that had become legend over France now echoed across the Pacific Ocean, where storms and steel blended into another American epic. The Thunderbolt shone once more, this time through victory in the Pacific. There, it faced a completely different enemy, the Imperial Japanese Army, whose soldiers fought to their very last breath. At New Guinea, muddy runways and brutal tropical weather grounded many aircraft. But for the P-47, nothing seemed impossible. To handle the vast distances between islands, Republic Aviation developed the long-range P-47N variant, with massive fuel tanks built into its wings. It could now fly over 2,000 miles, enough to escort the mighty B-29 superfortresses all the way into Japanese airspace. Japanese pilots, long accustomed to light and nimble opponents, were stunned and soon horrified by the wall of steel the Thunderbolt presented. A surviving Japanese airman later recalled, We hit it many times. It kept flying. Then it dove back and destroyed 3 of us. Hayes wrote, "The Pacific had now learned what Europe already knew. The Thunderbolt could endure almost anything thrown at it. But as the saying goes, even a cornered worm will turn." By late 1944, Germany unveiled its trump card, the Me-262, built by Messerschmitt AG. Powered by 2 Junkers Jumo 004B1 turbojet engines, it could reach speeds of over 870 km per hour, 540 miles per hour, at 6,000 meters, faster than any piston engine aircraft in the world. Armed with 4 Mk108 cannons, 20 or 30 millimeters, and capable of carrying 24 R4M rockets, or 2 250-kilogram bombs, the Me-262, in its Schwalbe (swallow) and Sturmvogel (stormbird) variants, was meant to be the miracle weapon that would finally solve Germany's Thunderbolt problem. But the Luftwaffe forgot one crucial truth. Even a jet must take off and land. The Me-262's greatest weakness lay in its fragility during takeoff and landing. Its Jumo 004 turbojet engines were notoriously unstable. They caught fire easily and broke down if throttled too quickly. And that was when the Thunderbolt pilots struck. They waited for the perfect moment and turned those proud jets into burning wrecks before they could climb to safety. Lieutenant Colonel John C. Jack Myers recalled, "Yes, it was faster. But in the end, it still had to fly through our bullets. One burst, and it came apart." The new P-47M variant could reach nearly 470 miles per hour, and when diving, it gained even more speed, enough to chase down even the jet that was supposed to be untouchable. Thus, the Me-262, once hailed as Germany's wonder weapon, lived only briefly from 1944 to 1945 before fading into history. For in the end, speed alone could not win a war. It was endurance and timing that decided victory. By 1945, Hayes wrote, "The glory of victory was no longer just in the dogfights. It was in the factories. It was a war of intellect, technology, and engineering, where the engineers were the captains steering the ship toward triumph." While Thunderbolt pilots fought across Europe and the Pacific, countless unknown heroes back home were fighting their own kind of war, armed not with guns, but with wrenches, rivets, and oil-stained hands. It was the industrial front of America. The Republic Aviation Company built more than 15,600 P-47s. At Farmingdale, a new aircraft rolled off the line every hour. At Evansville, Indiana, once just open farmland, 500 planes were produced each month. Each Thunderbolt contained 65,000 parts, 8 miles of wiring, and 2,000 pounds of aluminum. Many of the workers assembling them were women, who, before 1941, had never even touched an airplane. Mechanics, laborers, housewives, all joined together to forge the thunder of America. Hayes called it America's secret weapon. The ability to build faster than fear. The enemy could destroy 10, and we would replace 20. That, he said, was the difference between despair and hope, between defeat and victory. No matter how many Thunderbolts the Germans managed to destroy, American factories replaced them faster than the smoke could clear, ushering in the Luftwaffe's final, desperate gamble. No one fights in desperation because they believe in miracles. They fight because behind them lies defeat, and there is no way back. On January 1st, 1945, the Luftwaffe launched its final desperate offensive, Operation Bodenplatte, a massive surprise attack on Allied airfields. At dawn, explosions shook the 365th Fighter Group base at Metz. By noon, 22 Thunderbolts were burning wrecks on the tarmac. One captured German pilot was said to have smiled as he looked at the twisted remains of the planes. But Major George Brooking pointed towards the maintenance crews already clearing the wreckage and said quietly, You burned metal today, but we know how to make metal. Can you make new pilots? And the answer came swiftly. Within 2 days, brand new P-47s were already lined up on the runway, ready to fly again. Hayes concluded, one nation bled faster than it could heal. The other healed even as it bled. By the spring of 1945, the Luftwaffe was nothing but a shadow of its former self. Fuel was gone, veteran pilots were dead, and the new recruits had barely been trained. At that point, just the sound of a Thunderbolt's engine was enough to make German soldiers tremble. German doctors had a name for it, Jabo fever, or fighter-bomber fever. Those who had once faced the Spitfire or Hurricane had felt no fear, but before the Thunderbolt, they were terrified. A German officer later admitted, "We laughed in 1943. In 1945, there was no one left to laugh, or anything to laugh about." Intelligence reports captured the transformation clearly. April 1943, minor threat. December 1943, significant. March 1945, no survival possible indirect engagement. The laughter had died, along with the men who once laughed. Even after the war ended, the fear didn't fade. Survivors told stories of how they still heard the roar of the Thunderbolt in their nightmares. That thunder, once tearing open the skies, now echoed inside their memories, each time they heard a tractor engine or a civilian plane passing overhead. Many carried the trauma for life. Seeing a shadow sweep across a field was enough to make them dive for cover, imagining 8 Browning .50s raining fire from above. Post-war psychologists called it a mental disorder, invisible wounds of battle. But they didn't know that inside those men were not just scars of the mind, but shrapnel embedded in memory itself. The Thunderbolt had not only destroyed targets, it had shattered the spirit, turning the skies of Europe into a place where even the most hardened German soldier no longer dared to look up. War had taken much from those who remained behind. One calm autumn afternoon, Samuel Hayes visited an abandoned hangar in England. Inside stood a lone Thunderbolt, its paint scorched, its body scarred, silent yet still dignified. On the engine cowling, someone had written in chalk, "The Thunder spoke." Hayes thought of the young men who had once flown it. Farm boys, mechanics, factory workers, ordinary men who had managed to tame a beast of steel. They had proved that courage, endurance, and willpower could conquer fear itself. Years later, at a veterans gathering in Phoenix, he heard General Adolf Galland, former Luftwaffe commander, say, "We laughed in 1943. We didn't understand that the Americans weren't building a European fighter. They were building an American fighter, to be produced, to be powerful, and to survive." For Hayes, that was the final lesson of war. The Thunderbolt was more than a machine. It was a comrade, fighting side by side with the Allied pilots, sharing their risks, their victories, and their losses. It was the promise of a free nation. Proof that a people determined to remain free could forge thunder out of steel. And when its 8 Browning .50 caliber guns roared together, laughter fell silent, leaving only the echo of thunder, the thunder of freedom, the thunder of men who had given their lives for the war for liberty. As Winston Churchill once said, "We fight not for victory, but for the freedom of mankind." For even in sacrifice, humanity must preserve the right to live, without fear, without oppression, and without chains. Thank you for staying with us until the end. Your support gives us the strength to keep creating more stories. Stories of history, humanity, and the struggles that shaped the world we live in today. If you enjoy history told from a different perspective, please like and subscribe to our channel, and join us as we explore more heroic and heartfelt journeys from the past.